I know that I'm late to talking about this, and yeah, there's nothing much else to be added at this point. Everyone heard what happened, everyone read the title, whatever I decide that it might actually be, but I couldn't really say nothing. Ever since I heard about the passing of Akira Toriyama, I thought that I needed to say something. But again, like I said, what more is there to be mentioned at this point? This was also not scripted, by the way, like my usual to camera butter bunch videos tend to be. Most of the time, you can actually see me still looking at the script in the corner because I've just completed it recently or a long time ago. I thought to myself, when I eventually get round to having time to dedicate and say something, what should I focus on? And I decided that the best way was to talk about the impact of his works on a personal level, because there's a bunch of people that mentioned the sheer scope on the world, his legacy, his influence, everything. But from those tributes, at least the ones that I've seen personally, most of them don't really go into the impact on them as individuals, at least not that much. And of course, there's a risk with doing that. People might construe this as trying to make the death of someone about them. And that's not what I want to get at. If anything, we all on this channel, or at least watching this video to some extent, have been affected in some very different ways. Some a little bit more crazy than others. And I feel like those are also stories that we need to tell. So that's why I'm going into this video and addressing it the way that I am. So to begin with, how did I first find out about Akira Toriyama or any of his works? Well, like many, it was because of Dragon Ball, more specifically Dragon Ball Z. And this was, I want to say 2008, 2009 potentially. So when I was very, very young. And it was the first time that I had been away from home. We were on a school-wide camping trip for 4 days, one of those residentials that you would do. And during that time, the second day, it was revealed to me that we were going to be doing a play of some kind. Now, at this point, I don't think I'd acted in anything, and we were left to come up with it as our dorm rooms. So every dorm would prepare something, and they got to decide what it was like and what it would be. And essentially, this only was supposed to last about a couple of minutes or so. But because of the fact that I was, at the time, very new to the country, I just moved to Spain at this point, also didn't speak the language that well. Ultimately, none of the suggestions that I came up with really gelled, and out of nowhere, someone suggested doing something to do with Dragon Ball Z. Maybe I might have heard about it before because my brother got these fridge magnets or something about some of the characters. Maybe that was later, one or the other. But the first major time was, they tried to explain what was going on. Now you can imagine a bunch of, at the time, 7 or 8-year-olds trying to explain the plot of Dragon Ball Z to you in a language that you don't speak that well isn't going to go down super well. But eventually we did decide that, what we were going to do. I ended up playing Vegeta, surprisingly, and eventually we presented it. And for a time, I didn't think that much more about it. But I still remembered. And then maybe afterwards, once again, my brother started collecting these. Now, where he collected them from, I'm not sure exactly. I think he might have traded them from school, potentially. He found them recently in a clearing of his room, and then I just I would like to see this again. And like a lot of things that my brother starts reading, he picks them up casually, completes them, then I pick them up out of curiosity and become obsessed. That has happened multiple times. It didn't really happen with Dragon Ball yet. We're not there as of yet, but it's bleeding into my subconscious. At the same time, we see some episodes, I think it was the Boo Saga, that were on TV. Interesting how just they're presented with the two sides from the beginning and what was at the time the end of the story, because this is before Super, and I don't think we'd heard of GT yet. So from that aspect, I started to fill in the blanks in my head. How could Goku go from this child that I'd seen in some promotional material and from the manga itself? I guess this, at the time I presumed undead warrior of some kind. It was mid-Boo Saga, so this was when he got brought back. So, yeah, something about that stayed in my mind for longer than I realized, because this is where we hit a gap. It's not a gap that was too obvious, because even then, as a writer, I came up with a bunch of stories and still continue to do so. My brother and I, of course, whenever we would play with toys or we do role-play games at school, sometimes, every now and then, story beats or fill-in-the-blank moments that I had gathered from my limited exposure to Dragon Ball as a whole started to blend in. It became a fascinating thing to me how long I held on to the fill-in-the-blank moments and how many different directions I took those very limited stimuli, again, sometimes from times when I was better able to understand what was going on. I forgot to mention the manga was the first time I saw the name Akira Toriyama. I forgot to fill in that. So by this point, I knew who was responsible, the name was in the back of my head, the story was in the back of my head. But again, it wouldn't be until I moved away from Spain in 2012, and that was, and then, we pursued other endeavors and obviously did not have the same access to exposure that we'd had before. At some point, whenever I had decided to fill in the blanks, check out some parts of DBZ or OG Dragon Ball, when I was like, oh hey, I wonder what that was all about. And somehow, of course, even though I was using official sources, YouTube caught on. And then I started watching Team 4 Star. We're up to late 2017 now. So they, of course, say, please support the official release. I also do so. And as I waited for episode 60, I think by the time I caught up was on episode 58 or 59. So I went to episode 60. Last thing I saw they'd already posted was Plan to Eradicate Christmas. So yeah, right towards the tail end. But yeah, to seeing that more complete story and then seeing the other versions, that led me to Masako X. So by this point, it was not just in my subconscious, it was for the first time in, again, a good 7 to 8 years, re-entering my conscious mind and starting to become something more that I thought about all the time. And then came 2020. This part particularly, where during the pandemic, or, everyone having to be confined in the way that we all were, and unsure of how things were going to go, bad news around the corner all the time, just seemed like, oh yeah, this disaster happened, yeah, that might as well occur now, sure, why not? A lot of people, of course, turn to nostalgia, harkening back to a better time. And for me, that became a bit more complicated. Because, of course, to start off with, 2020 was the first year that J.K. Rowling started to reveal a lot of her true colors, so to speak. And, one franchise that I was, and still am very much entrenched in, was Harry Potter. I feel like that was just the shirt that I grabbed yesterday. That was a heavy blow, and once again on a personal level, and something that I would eventually come to terms with and work past in some way, but not entirely. And especially when it first happened, that was hugely devastating. Second up, Sky Does Everything, formerly Sky Does Minecraft. First YouTube channel I ever subscribed to. I was there during their hugest time of growth. I think I mentioned this on a Walking Wednesday, but when you're just starting off watching content on any social media platform, you tend to only know a few people, and then all those within their immediate circle. So it would take a while to expand. There was Paul George Jr. before Sky, but again, different. Mostly, there was just them for some time, until I started diversifying, and then eventually it was a Sky Media video that shouted out AFMAO in the first place. And once again, AFMAO, another huge fandom that I was a part of. Harry Potter and the My Street fandoms were both the ones that I properly started to dedicate to the inner workings of the fan base. It was the first fandoms that I were really a part of. Harry Potter mostly when I was younger, then AFMAO when I was a little older. And again, that continued, and I've actually met a bunch of people through both of those, especially AFMAO. Back to Sky Does Minecraft again, a lot of allegations came out very clearly, some troubling and disturbing things, and that was one that I was not able to work past, and I have not seen any Sky videos since then, apart from collaborations on other people's channels to not contribute directly. In the case of AFMAO, it was a little bit different because it wasn't something that I did, it was something that happened to me. Again, early 2020. The relationship I entered in 2019 and ended in early 2021, but I find out a lot of stuff that was going on that I won't get into. That was, again, terrible and really took a toll on me. And because AFMAT was one of the things that brought us together, and that person has some connection to AFMAT. I'm not going to say what it is, but they do have some connection. Every time that I thought about AFMAT for most of 2020, or I thought of trying to go back, I could not bring myself to. And why did I bring all this up? Well, because, again, the three major things that I've had a huge nostalgic connection to, or a huge fandom connectivity, suddenly, for varying reasons, I felt like I could no longer be a part of those. I would eventually work past some of those because 2020 November was when 5 years later started on the main channel. But again, we're not talking about that. What was left, through sheer twist of fate, it ended up being Dragon Ball. You know, this thing that, again, had presented itself to me before any of those things that I mentioned, and was just always there, somewhere in the back of my mind, or in the forefront, or in some sort of thing that I might have taken influence from. I think in 2018 as well, I started doing a few what if videos for AFMAO content, but eventually it was like, I'm going back to Dragon Ball stuff again. Why not attempt that myself? Why not get more versed in the inner workings than I am already? You know, clearly Masako is a huge expert. That's when I did my full watch through of both Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, and then parts of Dragon Ball Super, as I would eventually keep working along those. If people are wondering why I keep mentioning that I haven't seen all of Dragon Ball Super in some of my early what if videos, or if I don't like to comment on certain things or certain characters, it's because I haven't got to them yet. That is why. Because it took me quite some time to get there, and it was possibly the darkest place that I had been in at the time when I got there. And that's the real thing that I have to thank Toriyama for, because, again, even without knowing so, just by virtue of writing a bunch of stories nearly 20 years before I was even born, in fact, you know, more stories that weren't just Dragon Ball, you know, Dr. Slump as well, I picked up at some point when I found it in a random shopping gully. Just by virtue of, you know, doing the thing that he loved in the way that he loved, it pulled me out of that, and it allowed me to explore and divulge into something else very different, and find an entirely different crowd of people from a completely different source, this channel, to discuss that with. Because I didn't think people were gonna necessarily care about these what if scenarios or anything else that I had to say, or my thoughts on a bunch of Dragon Media. The first time I even tried doing a Dragon Ball video back on the main channel, I was terrible because I just didn't know what I was talking about. Before you create. That's how Toriyama helped me personally. So what to say about this? I guess what I kind of already said by accident, that Dragon Ball is always there. I mean, we all know that it's going to continue. Dr. Slump seems to have had his moment in the cultural zeitgeist. You don't really get any Arale Mania comments like you would do in 80s Japan, for example. But yeah, on some level, there's always that impact. And on the impact of how I like to tell stories or think about them. Because, I mean, people know that I'm a huge fan of trope subversions and, you know, trying to play with people's expectations in usually fun ways, but sometimes dramatic. I like to blend comedy and, you know, occasionally action, but also drama into the stories that I tell. And I do get some of that from AFMAO, naturally, but mostly the idea of that bait and switch comes from Toriyama. So yeah, I'm just incredibly grateful that somebody was even willing to take that risk in the first place and write the story the way that they wanted to, despite the negatives that can sometimes come from the structure. The positives still outweighing them 100-fold, possibly more. So yeah, kind of the franchise that I have not abandoned is the one that never actually abandoned us. I hope it's the same for everyone else. There was a thumbnail in one of the other tributes that said something to the effect of life is temporary but legacy is forever. I have no doubt that that is going to stand. Toriyama will continue to inspire us all in some way or another. I think there's only so much that I can contribute to talking about him directly in this way, so I think I've said my piece. Might be a little late, but yeah. But I guess my other question is to everyone else. Let me know in the comments if your personal stories of Akira Toriyama, whether, influenced some of your storycraft or, I don't know, your favorite characters or, rate as something that they might have done directly. That's one thing I didn't touch on was character relatability. That's going to be a huge thing for a lot of people. So yeah, let's see what that's like. But yeah, I guess until next time, go Toriyama and teach a dinosaur to ride a ball.